So now with summer approaching, I know it's a little chilly out there today, but summer is here. And there's something about having lazy summer days that reminds us how much we are in need of rest. Not just for our bodies, but for our souls. Think about those warm afternoons when time just seems to slow down and you find a shady spot under a tree, maybe climb into a hammock to be gently rocked as you listen to the wind rustling in the leaves, the distant hum of insects, maybe even hearing some gentle laughter from your family or the neighbors. You sip a cold drink and you focus on the little beads of condensation that drip slowly and unhurriedly down the glass. And we let our minds wander, maybe even fall asleep for a little while, feeling safe and unhurried. And it's in moments like this that we remember that we weren't made to be always rushing, to be always working, to be always worrying. We need rest, true rest. So today we're kicking off a new series called Summer Psalms Soul Refreshment. And what better way to start than with the probably most well-known of them all, Psalm 23. So the familiar words of this psalm are often read at bedsides and at funerals. They were even read at the baptism of a young girl that I had the privilege of baptizing because it was her favorite psalm. She was only 9, and she had it all memorized in the King James Version. But while the psalm is often read at special occasions, it's actually written for everyday life. The words are a declaration of trust. They're a song of peace and an invitation to slow down and let God lead. Psalm 23 paints a beautiful picture for us, not just of physical rest, but of deep spiritual renewal. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. So today I want us to hear these words like an invitation from God to slow down, to trust Him, and to let Him guide us to places of rest and refreshment. Because even when life is anything but peaceful, our shepherd is offering us true peace. So whether you're coming this morning carrying joy or worry, certainty or questions, the psalm meets you right where you are. So we're going to start by standing up if you're able, and we're going to read Psalm 23 together. And I'm certain that many of you have it memorized in the King James Version, because that is the best version for memorization. But for today, we're going to read it together from the NIV, which is on the screen. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely Your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You can be seated. So the first point that we're going to discuss today is that God's care is personal. So just look at the first line. The Lord is my shepherd. So David, the author of this psalm, was himself what when he was growing up? He was a shepherd, right? And it's maybe this background that's the reason he doesn't start off with using theology or even some abstract praise. he begins with relationship. The Lord is my shepherd. It's personal. Not just a God who exists, not just a shepherd in general, but mine. Now, shepherds in ancient times lived with their sheep. They guided them, they protected them, they corrected them when they wandered, and they even called them by name. And it's from his personal lens that his words of care come from. David is making the point that God cares for him the way that he, David, used to care for his sheep. But even though David is speaking from personal experience, his words also remind the reader of Israel's bigger history. When God led his people through the wilderness, providing food from heaven and water from a rock, he was acting like a shepherd, guiding and caring for his flock. Because of this, Israel's poets and prophets often described God as their shepherd. In this psalm, David uses that same image, one that connects to Israel's history and also expresses his own personal relationship with God. Now, when I was little, back in the dark ages, one of my favorite toys was a dollhouse. And I would play with it for hours, moving the furniture around and getting the little people to do everyday things like cooking dinner in the little kitchen, or the little kids would go outside to play, or they'd all go to bed. And while I was playing, I remember wondering if there was a giant who lived in the sky, moving me and all the other people in the world around, just like I moved the little people in my dollhouse. And I pictured this big man gently moving me and putting me wherever he wanted, having me do whatever I was supposed to do. So you could say that that was my very childlike and very mistaken view of God. Because God doesn't control us like puppets. He gave us free will. Unlike the giant in the sky image that I imagined, God doesn't simply move us around to get his way. It isn't a big hand that is ordering our lives. It's his great love and his great care that guide us. So when David describes God as a shepherd, he's painting a picture of deep care and guidance, not distant management. God doesn't direct our steps from afar like some giant in the sky. He provides for us and he stays close to us. And David makes this clear when he says, I lack nothing, in the second part of verse 1. He's echoing the same words that Moses used in Deuteronomy 2, verse 7, to remind the people that during their 40 years in the wilderness, God was with them and made sure that they had everything that they needed. That phrase connects David's trust back to Israel's history of God's faithful provision. But Moses also warned the people that if they turned away from God, they could end up with nothing at all. Things would get so desperate, he said, that people would even resort to unthinkable acts like eating their own children. David, however, chooses to trust God completely by calling the Lord his shepherd. He is committing to following God's lead, and he believes that God will always care for him. It's the same promise that we find in Psalm 34:10. Those who seek the Lord will lack no good thing. So let me ask you today, are you living like you have a shepherd? Like someone is watching over your life, not just when things go wrong, but always. So our next point that we're going to talk about is that rest is a gift. So listen to these words. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. That is summer language, isn't it? Green pastures, quiet waters, soul refreshment. But it's also a challenge because, let's be honest, how many of us are actually good at taking the time to lie down, to rest, to allow ourselves to be led? Sometimes God has to make us lie down. Sometimes he calls us to stop striving, to stop carrying what we weren't meant to carry, to rest not just physically but deeply. Summer often gives us a chance to slow down, but we can be physically at rest and spiritually exhausted at the same time. The invitation here is to let God restore your soul. And that's more than a nap or a beach day. It's peace that settles into your spirit. David tells us that God meets not only his physical needs like food and water and rest, but also his emotional and his spiritual needs. When he talks about green pastures and quiet waters, he's not just describing a peaceful scene. He's saying that God gives him a deep sense of safety and security and calm, like sheep who can lie down and rest because they know that their shepherd is near. Now, the phrase quiet waters could actually be more literally translated as waters of rest, which connects to some big moments in Israel's story. In fact, it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Eden was the original place of perfect peace, provision, and fellowship with God. In Genesis 2, the garden is watered by rivers and is described as a place of abundance, life, and harmony. There was no fear, there was no hunger, there was no conflict, just resting, trusting life in God's presence. And by referring to waters of rest, there's an echo to that first ideal, God's design for humanity to dwell in peace and well-being with him. Quiet waters or waters of rest also echoes how God led his people toward a place of rest after the Exodus. After God brought Israel out of slavery in Egypt, he promised to lead them to the promised land, a place described as their rest. Throughout the wilderness journey, God's goal was to bring his people into a settled, peaceful land where they would be safe, provided for, and could worship him freely. So if you look at Deuteronomy 12, verses 8 to 10, it says, "Your pattern of worship will change. Today, all of you are doing as you please because you have not yet arrived at that place of rest, the land the Lord your God is giving you as your special possession. But you will soon cross the Jordan River and live in the land the Lord your God is giving you, when he gives you rest from all your enemies and you're living safely in the land." And then if you look at Joshua 21, verse 44, we find a description of the promised land as a gift of rest from enemies and wandering, when it's written, "And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had solemnly promised their ancestors. None of their enemies could stand against them, for the Lord helped them conquer all their enemies." So as you can see, waters of rest evokes that idea of God faithfully leading his people out of hardship and into peace. And it even points all the way back to Eden, the first place of peace and provision. So when David says God leads him to the waters of rest, he's remembering how God has always guided his people to places of blessing, rest, and restoration. And all this is to say that when David talks about being led to quiet waters, he's drawing on these two big biblical images. God leading Israel toward the rest of the promised land after the Exodus, and the original rest and abundance of Eden. It's a promise that God's desire is to bring his people into places of blessing and peace and restored relationship with him. As we come to verse 3 of Psalm... As we come to verse 3 of Psalm 23, David shifts from describing physical rest to focusing on spiritual renewal. He says, "He restores my soul. He guides me along the right paths." In this verse, David paints a picture of a God who not only refreshes us, but also leads us in the right direction. And there's been some debate about the phrase right paths or paths of righteousness, depending on the translation. But whether we understand it as morally righteous or simply as good and straight, the meaning points to the same truth. God leads us on the kind of path that honors him and brings life to us. The image of a path is one that we often see in wisdom literature, especially in Proverbs. In that context, a path is a symbol of the course of one's life. Proverbs presents a clear choice, the straight path that leads to life or the crooked path that leads to destruction. So when David says that God leads him on the right path, he's saying that God is actively guiding him away from destruction and toward a life marked by integrity and justice and purpose. And why does God do this? Well, David says it's for his name's sake. In other words, God shepherds us not just for his benefit, or for our benefit, but to reflect his character, his faithfulness, his goodness, and his glory. God's guidance in our lives is an expression of who he is. This is more than just help with decision making. It's about how God shapes the whole direction of our lives. David is showing us that the good shepherd leads us to live in ways that reflect his goodness and bring him honor. And Psalm 23 reminds us that like sheep, we have both basic needs, like food and water and rest, and deeper ones like peace, direction, and meaning. And the Lord, our shepherd, provides for all of them. He not only meets our needs, he leads us towards wholeness. Next point is that we can find peace even in uncertainty. So David doesn't pretend that life is all green pastures. He's honest about the journey. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, not if, but when. Dark valleys are not a matter of possibility, they're a matter of time. Loss comes, confusion comes, illness, grief, disappointment, loneliness, they all come. And David knows what it is to walk through places where hope feels dim and the way forward isn't clear. And yet he says, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. So just let that part sink in. You are with me. That's the promise. Not that life will always be easy or that faith guarantees a smooth path, but that we are never, ever alone. The shepherd walks with us, even when the road is dark, even when the diagnosis is devastating, even in the relationships that fall apart, or even when the next step feels impossible to see. Anybody remember the movie Finding Nemo? Yes? So, if you haven't seen it or it's been a while, Marlin, the father, is desperate to find his son. He's a clownfish, by the way. And the journey is terrifying. He has to cross the entire ocean, facing sharks and jellyfish, anglerfish, and the vast, dark abyss. And one of the scariest moments in the movie is when Marlin and Dory swim into the deep, dark trench. They can't see anything. It's pitch black. Marlin panics and wants to turn back, but Dory, ever hopeful, sings, just keep swimming, just keep swimming. So even when they can't see where they're going, they keep moving forward together. And it's Dory's calm, persistent companionship, her being with Marlin, that helps him keep going when he'd rather give up. And that's a lot like what David is saying in Psalm 23. He doesn't say God takes away all the darkness. He says, you are with me. Even when we're in the deep, scary places where we can't see the way ahead, God is there. He doesn't leave us to figure it out alone. He's our constant companion, gently guiding us forward step by step. And that's the picture that David is painting. He's saying, I don't have to fear what's around the corner because I trust who is right beside me. And if you're in one of those valleys right now, hear this clearly, that God has not abandoned you. You are not forgotten. Your shepherd is near, even when you can't feel him, even when your prayers feel hollow. He's there, holding you up, walking you through. Because sometimes God doesn't take us around the valley. He takes us through it, but never alone. Our next point, God's goodness is ongoing. So as we enter into the latter half of Psalm 23, David shifts his imagery. It's no longer just green pastures or dark valleys. Now he describes a table that is prepared before him, with a cup that overflows, and God's goodness and mercy following him all the days of his life. This is not just surviving, this is thriving. Not just enough to get by, but more than enough. So just think about that table. It's a sign of welcome, of safety, of belonging. It's like God is saying, come on in, be my guest. In fact, you can consider yourself to be my guest of honor. Imagine sitting at that table with every need being met. You're not watching your back in fear. You're resting securely, even with your enemies looking on, because God himself has prepared this place for you. Then David says, my cup overflows. That's not just a little bit of blessing. That's abundance. It's God giving more than we ask or than we can imagine. Joy spilling over the edges, grace poured out, not in measured doses, but freely and generously. And then David says, goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. But the word follow is actually stronger in the original language. It means to pursue or chase down. God's goodness and mercy don't just drift along behind us. They run after us. They seek us out and they won't let us go. Friends, God doesn't just give us the bare minimum to get through this life. He often surprises us with much, much more. With unexpected joy in hard seasons, with friendships that hold up, by finding beauty in places that we didn't expect to find it, by experiencing grace that we didn't even know we needed, peace that makes no sense except that we know he is with us. This is the God who doesn't just walk with us through valleys, he also prepares feasts for us. He heals us, he restores us, he calls us home. He is not a God of bare minimums. He is a God of abundance, of grace, and of overflowing love. So let's trust him, not just to get us through the tough times, but to fill our lives with goodness in ways that we can't even contain. The shepherd imagery is again deeply personal. David isn't talking about a distant guide who shouts directions from far away. He's describing someone right beside him, rod and staff in hand, protecting him, guiding him through the danger. It's like this, God's not just like a tour guide that is pointing the way from a distance. He's not on a big megaphone, right? Still on the bus while you're wandering around shouting at you where to go. He's like a trained search and rescue worker who walks beside you through the storm, flashlight in hand, steadying you on the rocky ground and shielding you from harm. David said he doesn't have to be afraid, not because the danger isn't real, but because God is truly with him. The rod is there to fight off threats. The staff is there to keep him on the path. And that brings comfort. So finally, verse 6 wraps it all up. David is absolutely sure that God's goodness and love won't just show up here and there. They will chase him down every single day. Instead of enemies pursuing him, it's God's grace that's on his heels. It's God's grace that is unrelenting. And he knows that care, that protection, will carry him all the way home to God's house, where he will belong forever. So the same God who led David like a shepherd led the people of Israel out of slavery in Egypt and into the promised land. Later, that same shepherd put on flesh and came to us in Jesus. Jesus, the good shepherd, led his people through an even greater rescue, freeing us from sin and death. And he's still guiding us today, not to a physical place, but toward a new heaven and a new earth where everything is made right. Jesus lived out this psalm himself. He walked through the valley, through the suffering, rejection, and even death. And he trusted the Father to lead him through. And now, because we belong to Jesus, God the Father and Jesus the shepherd walk with us too. So how does this psalm speak into the life of the church? In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 4, Jesus is called the chief shepherd. He's given pastors and leaders to help guide and care for his people, not as replacements for him, but as his helpers. So it is through the church that we experience God's shepherding care today. It's in the ups and downs of life. That's when you'll be able to look around and see others that are walking the path with you. All of you, each person of the church, being led by the one who promises to see each of us all the way home. So let me ask you today, where do you need to experience God's leading and peace? Are you weary from rushing and striving, needing green pastures for your soul? Are you thirsty for the still waters of peace? Are you walking through a dark valley needing to know that you're not alone? Or are you standing at a table of blessing, called to pause and give thanks? Psalm 23 is an invitation to us all, an invitation to slow down, to breathe deep, to remember we have a shepherd who knows us by name. So this summer, when the pace of life changes, even just a little, let those words be more than something you've memorized long ago. Let them shape how you live today. So when you sit under a tree in the shade, hear him say, I made you lie down in green pastures. When you listen to the quiet trickle of water or watch the waves roll in, remember, he leads you beside quiet waters. When worries crowd your mind at night, whisper, he is with me. When you gather your family or friends around a table, see it as his table and say, you prepare a table before me, my cup overflows. Let these summer days be a season not just of physical rest, but of soul-deep renewal. Because this psalm is not just for funerals or special occasions, it's for every day, for your every day. Because God offers care. God offers rest. God offers peace. God offers overflowing grace. The Lord is your shepherd. You shall not want. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your word, and we thank you that you are a personal God, that you are here with us each and every day through all the ups and the downs and the twists and the turns of life. You are shepherding us. You are guiding us. You are caring for us. You are pouring your grace over us and into us in such abundance that we can't even grasp it. God, we thank you that you are a God of love, that you are a God of peace, and that you are a God who seeks to restore our souls. May we take your words into our very beings and live them out every day. In the name of the Good Shepherd, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen.